Hey everyone, today on the lovely day of April 1st, we are going to be discussing your theories. I asked for some wild and out there Dead by Daylight theories for me to prove. You all certainly delivered. Some are strange, some are pretty convincing, and others are... well, you'll see. Let's get into it. Okay, first theory. When playing Killer, we are actually seeing the entity's perspective. This can be explained through the presence of the red light in front of the killer. This light seems unnatural, but could potentially be the light the entity is emitting almost. A red, ominous glow that doesn't appear to come from anywhere really. This same glow can be seen in the basement, which has red lights too. The basement is often associated as being one of the places most closely tied to the entity. When the killer goes undetectable, the red light disappears, and potentially the connection to the entity is briefly severed, which could also be why the terror radius disappears also. Further, this comment mentions that the entity dislikes light, based on the title of the game, Dead by Daylight, and further mechanics such as flashlights being so effective at blinding, and also mechanics such as light burn for Wraith and Nurse. Light holds more power than it seemingly should in the realm, and when it does appear, it's in quite small quantities. The comment also mentions that this is how we can see out of some of the killers who have obstructed eyes, or don't have eyes at all, like Demo, Nurse, and Pyramid Head. These killers likely track in different ways than with their eyes, so what we are seeing is actually what the entity sees. This seems pretty plausible to me actually. To further this theory, there were comments saying that not only are we viewing through the entity, but we are the entity. This theory mainly comes from us as the player being almost omnipotent within the game. We can view everything. The survivors, the killers, the observer. We can literally look out of the killer's eyes within the trial, almost like a front seat to the action. This would also explain why certain killers look back and interact with you directly in the lobby. Characters like Trickster wink, and others such as Sadako or Pinhead give a show of their power, as they're in the realm more so by their own choice. Trickster, being a sadistic killer, winks at you, the entity, as he likes being in the realm, so it's almost like a sign of respect. The same goes for Plague's chanting in the lobby. She does it out of respect, and she knows you can hear it as you look on. Potentially Ash's more derogatory phrases could even be directed at us, the entity.
Kiss my grits.
Further, others mention the intense emotions that the entity feeds on is too what we as the player feed on. The anger, frustration, satisfaction, or joy that we get from the game is what makes us continue to play, much like the entity's own dietary needs. This next one I thought was a really cool theory. The universal perks are from dead or past survivors and killers who are no longer in the realm. So this is in relation to the universal perks that are unlocked for everyone immediately. Stuff like Resilience, Spine Chill, or Plunderer's Instinct. For killers, it's stuff like Hex No One Escapes Death, Deerstalker, and Insidious. What's interesting about the universal survivor perks is that some of them include a quote in the flavor text from the lost tapes, each of them credited to someone with a singular name: Murph, Sujan, Dylan, Clyde, and more. Many of these perks contain survivors and faces also. Resilience, for example, could be the face of a previous survivor. Each name has likely been assigned to each perk based on what is said in the lost tapes, whatever they are. Potentially a Benedict Baker type figure made a series of recordings from old survivors, and each of these previous characters could be heard in them. The lost tapes could be literal in its naming, as in the tapes from the lost, or the dead. What's further interesting is that some of them have quotes, but no name, like in Premonition. This suggests that over time these names are slowly being forgotten. All of these old faces of previous survivors are slowly becoming unknown to our survivors. Again, all remnants of what used to be. With the loss of Stranger Things last year, we saw this happen in a way too. Steve and Nancy, who are now gone, no longer appear in their perk images, instead replaced with a generic person, with their quotes gone from the bottom. Maybe this is how they're remembered. The only thing that remains is a vague idea of what their characters used to be. In the same way, at the very least, from the universal perks that remain, we can get a decent idea of what each person was like, based on the perk their names appear under. The next theory is quite simple, but I like it. The RPD is so big it's literally breaking the realm. Throughout the RPD we can see these big clusters of matter that look almost biological. It bursts through the walls almost like it is bursting at the seams. In the comment that was left, they mentioned that these growths look almost like the auric cells. Auric cells are described as the building blocks of the realm. So these gaps being filled in with the auric matter is potentially almost like the entity gluing the RPD realm together as it literally falls apart due to its considerable size. This would also explain why these messy growths appear, but also why they sometimes block off certain areas that were open in the Resident Evil games. This realm may be particularly hard to contain due to the entity becoming infected or contaminated by one of the biological experiments within the RPD, possibly even the T-virus. The entity is often shown as almost a plant-like creature, so possibly it was infected by something, and it caused these mutated and erratic growths of auric cells. We can possibly see the origin of this within the RPD hooks, where a shattered T-virus vial can be seen, wrapped by this same substance. This outbreak of sorts could also justify the strange inconsistencies heard in the RPD, like the helicopter flying overhead, and the zombies that can still be heard outside. When it snatched the RPD, possibly the entity got a little tangled up in the T-virus. Moving on, Yun-Jin Lee is the reincarnation of the Hillbilly's mother, Evelyn Thompson. I'm not sure where this one came from. I saw it both on Twitter and in the comments of my post, so here we go, I guess. First off, the timelines for their lives do kind of line up. Evelyn Thompson was presumably around 50 when she died in 1972. Yun-Jin Lee is likely in her mid to late 20s in 2021, so no overlap. That's a good start. It's possible with Hillbilly being around 21 that this is the gap between both the death of Evelyn and the birth of Yun-Jin, as Evelyn died at Billy's hand. So Evelyn dies in 1972, 21 years later, in 1993, Yun-Jin is born. The main features that Evelyn and Yun-Jin share are probably their unpleasant or selfish natures, with underlying humanity and care that they shove down, as to not break their external facade. One of the very few things we know about Evelyn is that she took caffeine pills, which appear in Billy's add-ons named Mother's Helpers. This is of course a reference to the song by the Rolling Stones, named Mother's Little Helper. This is an interesting musical connection, with Yun-Jin later becoming a producer of a band. Evelyn probably took these pills because of her worry for her son, or guilt overwhelming her at abandoning him and locking him away. Maybe the true evil of the pair was Billy's father, and Evelyn did in fact love Billy. That's a stretch though from just this add-on. This is a similar guilt perhaps to Yun-Jin, upon her reincarnation, who found and raised the trickster in her own way, only to lead him to his killing, which she tries to ignore despite seeing connections between Trickster's tour dates and the murders. They both created a monster in a sense. Evelyn through her poor treatment of Billy, and Yun-Jin through her negligence and selfish nature surrounding her own career. Maybe this is history repeating itself. There are also some visual similarities between Yun-Jin and Hillbilly, as well as Evelyn. Both Yun-Jin and Billy wear 2 belt buckles each. This can be seen both on Billy's wounded arm, but also around his waist. Evelyn in the Tome 5 trailer can be seen to wear a similar clothing type to Yun-Jin, and even have a similar short haircut, with a similar white hair colour. The perk Lightborn, belonging to Hillbilly, is also quite interesting. Yun-Jin in her own way was also Lightborn, born to be in the spotlight. Alright, that's the best I've got. There are multiple versions of the same survivor, because they are the same survivor, just from different universes in the multiverse. This actually explains quite a lot, and isn't actually that wild of a theory. I always found it strange, for example, that despite Dwight looking fairly young, that he had been a pizza delivery boy, worked at a gas station, been a Christmas elf at a mall, a snake oil merchant, and worked at Peak 22. It further mentions he's been to college, went skydiving, performed in a school play, and has been to Seoul. This isn't impossible, of course, he could just be a very busy man, but with him being potentially as young as 21, this seems like a push. This similar kind of logic also applies to many other characters too. Basically, it's way more believable if all the different outfits are representations of the character from different universes, and weren't all done by the same character. So there's a pizza delivery Dwight, a gas station Dwight, and the main one we see in the tomes previously worked at Peak 22. But each of these jobs from each of these universes resulted in him going into the woods, drinking too much moonshine, and getting taken by the entity. This would then explain how we can actually have multiple of the same character in the same lobby. Next up, Azarov, Wraith's old boss, is still alive inside of the Azarov's axe weapon that Wraith wields. Much like how Azarov forced Philip to unwillingly kill, Philip now forces Azarov to unwillingly kill, by using him as his weapon. We know the entity can keep things alive without a body, so why not Azarov? In Wraith's other weapon cosmetic, the Heart of Miss Smithson, we can see a beating, alive heart, throbbing from where the skull of Azarov would usually be, which basically proves this, so a brain could totally be alive in that same spot usually. On the Autohaven realm, and Azarov's resting place in particular, there is no Azarov, which always seems strange. So maybe he's actually in the Wraith's weapon, almost like an eternal punishment. Or at least his head and spine are. The rest of his body can be seen scattered around the realm in pieces. Yeah, I think that's a cool theory. It's also pretty funny because every time he goes to cloak, he'd just be slamming Azarov's head into the bell. Which is, better than he deserves. Moving on, Ash is the key to escaping the realm. The reasoning behind this one was that Ash is the only survivor who can be heard to speak, with the other survivors possibly being restrained in some form by the entity. Ash can only do it possibly because of his strength, and his role as the chosen one in his universe. However, instead of trying to reason with the killers with his speech, he instead vocalizes a range of confusion and one-liners, in the true Ash way. He has the power of speech in a realm where it seems no one else can talk aside the killers, and he uses it in possibly the least useful way. I don't have much to add to this, I just thought it was a funny theory. Another escaping or entity defeating theory was that Claudette will be the one to defeat the entity. With her knowledge of botany, and the entity being a plant-like organism that reacts negatively to the blighted flowers, it seems likely that Claudette could actually be the one to defeat the entity. Blight is probably too far gone in his current state, where Claudette is largely unchanged by her entrance to the realm. We know that at some point the survivors found Vigo's lab, and maybe even worked for him or learned from him, with Claudette's blighted outfit being named Vigo's pupil. This outfit is covered in the blighted substance. It even mentions in the botany knowledge description that Claudette transforms the flowers she finds in the realm into healing items. This further suggests she could be responsible for certain healing items, such as the refined serum we got during Halloween, potentially after her time at Vigo's lab, the serum being a safer version of Blight's own serum, seemingly, and bestows the user with a similar power. So the theory of Claudette being the one to defeat the entity, or break the survivors out of the realm, actually holds a lot of weight, I think, with a combination of the blight that we know affects the entity in a negative way, and then also her skill with botany. Okay, next up, the artist is the entity. This is a weirdly plausible theory, I feel. The artist and her backstory is something I never really understood. Carmina seems to blame herself for the bad events in her life, when it doesn't really seem like she should. A lot of her story seems almost disconnected from reality, almost like it was created by someone, and wasn't a real story, but instead just a story meant to create emotion. The way the emotion is reached though seems forced and almost insincere. In her lore, in a moment of great despair, crows come to Carmina's rescue, crows being creatures that are heavily associated with the entity, scattered throughout its realm, possibly even the way the entity views the trials. Carmina, upon entering the realm, has become very crow-like herself. She makes crow noises, she has a crow-based power, and even her physical movement is similar to that of a crow. Further, as the comment outlines, her weapon looks very similar to that of the entity's claws. The claws of the entity being one of the very few things we see of it, and they look incredibly similar to Carmina's weapon. The name of the artist could be a literal reference to the entity also, being the designer and artist of the realm itself. She further has perks like no other killer. Grim Embrace allows her to block all generators midway through the game. Pain Resonance is just very strong. Hex Pentimento allows totems to be reconstructed, an ability unheard of prior to Carmina's release. As a killer, she is also just very strong, which would make sense. If the entity embodied itself in the trials, it would probably make itself pretty good in gameplay. Finally, I thought we should get in this one. Everything in the realm is a hallucination from the doctor that he is inflicting onto a patient. I weirdly really like this one. The comment first posits that Doctor is the observer, and the world of DBD is happening inside of a patient's mind. All the survivors and killers are people this patient once knew, or people who walk the halls of Larry's Memorial Institute, where this is all happening. Characters like Nemesis, Pyramid Head, Jill, Leon, Cheryl, Laurie, Myers, and all the licensed characters are simply from popular culture as we know them, but imagined as real under the doctor's experimentation. The killers are the result of different fears of the patient, the trapper's hatred for his father possibly, the Wraith's haunting guilt, and so on, all of them amplified and distorted under Doctor's methods, until it manifests as the Realm. We know Doctor was experimenting with minds and electricity to find the best method of interrogation and extracting information, so maybe the Realm is just like this huge and terrifying interrogation method, and we are actually just in Larry's. Much like Doctor's various files seen in his add-ons, we can see books lining the Observer's shelves. We know in Doctor's experiments he quite literally opens people's minds, and even tries to connect his mind to his own patients. Maybe this, the Realm, is his success in that. He now lives in this person's head, sifting through their memories. As this person's ongoing torture persists, and the Realm is created, he picks out the bad memories and creates killers. He picks out the people the person loves and makes them into survivors to be hunted, and it's all to extract some kind of information. A huge and terrifying interrogation technique. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you would add to these theories, or any more theories you have, down below. Thanks, and goodbye.